Hello everybody. Today I want to talk about autocomplete in nvim and specifically how to configure the nvim-cmp plugin to work nicely in a bunch of different scenarios. And I'm not sure if it's supposed to be pronounced nvim-cmp or not. It's nvim-cmp. It's probably the most popular autocomplete plugin at the moment in the Vim ecosystem. Pretty flexible. You can do a lot of configuration with Lua to make it behave exactly as you want. And so here's my configuration for it. It's 384 lines. And so before we get off into the weeds, looking at all this config, I thought I might show this plugin in use just to kind of motivate why you would want to do this config in the first place. And over here on the right, I have a list of things that I want to demonstrate and talk about. So I'm going to open a file with some TypeScript in it because that'll give me some nice LSP powered auto completion to demo. Now, the most obvious use case for a plugin like this is to do exactly that, is to autocomplete. So if I start typing, it gives me a list of things that I might want to insert. And as you can see here in the menu, some of them are different types. So we've got variables, fields, functions, and in the square brackets, it's showing me where the autocomplete entry came from. In this case, it was from an LSP server. And then on the right, of the completion menu, we've got a documentation window. And so as I move through the different options, I get to see different documentation for those. So that's the main use case for using auto completion with a plugin like this. The next thing that I want to demonstrate is a thing called ghost text, which we're seeing right now on the screen. And as I move through these completions, in fact, if I delete some of the text, you'll see there that there's kind of a subtle gray dir in the buffer. It's not actually in the buffer though, it's virtual text. So the bytes are not in the text of the buffer. It's just showing me what would be completed if I were to accept the completion at this time. And then of course we've got mappings. Now I've already implicitly used some of these as part of this demo. Obviously tab being a big one. Now I call it smart tab because I have overloaded the tab key to do a lot of things. And the idea is that you can just kind of mindlessly mash the tab key and it will do the right thing in different contexts. The obvious one that we're looking at now is it cycles forward through the list of possible completions, and Shift Tab would go backwards. But in other situations, for example here, where I'm just in the middle of nowhere in white space, Tab will insert a shift width of tabs, and Shift Tab will delete. The same thing, of course, would happen over here in the leading indent. So that's what I call Smart Tab. The other thing that it would do is if I've got a snippet, for example, I'm going to expand that snippet. Oops, if I expand that snippet, I've moved to a placeholder. That's why the word header is selected. So if I just start typing something here and then accept that completion and hit tab again, it'll move to the next placeholder, which in my case I've defined to be after the end of the table. And so I have a lot of snippets and different placeholders in those snippets. But yeah, the idea of tabs is like a move forward through the placeholders, and Shift Tab would move backwards through the placeholders. The complement to Smart Tab is Smart Backspace. Now, Smart Backspace doesn't need to be that smart in a buffer like this because I'm using Expand Tab. So what that setting does is basically says, every time you insert a tab in the buffer, it's actually going to insert spaces, shift width spaces. In my case, shift width is 2 in this buffer. So it's going to insert 2 spaces every time I insert a tab. And likewise, when I delete, it deletes 2 spaces. In buffers where expand tab is not set, where it's no expand tab, and you have real hard tab characters in the buffer, then smart tab does some cleverness there to basically behave pretty much exactly as it does in the case of expand tab. I'm not going to demo that because I don't have a buffer right now with a no expand tab set. Then we've got this distinction between replacing and inserting that I just want to quickly demonstrate. So just say I have something like a list of things. So errors. I want to put some things in here, like I've got the abort error class, and then I realize later on that I would like to insert another kind of error. So let's just say I have, I don't know, class network error. Okay. That's there, and I go here and I'm like, okay, I'm going to insert this error, and then I realize, oh, hang on, this is the one I actually wanted to insert. We have a choice about what should happen here. If I were to accept this completion in insert behavior, I would expect it to effectively insert the text into the buffer and push everything else to the right, which is what happened there. But in the case where, just say I want to replace the text that I'm immediately before. So just say I'm here in the middle of a word and it's like, well, I actually want this thing to be a abort error. So when I accept this completion, I don't want it to insert the rest of the text abort error and then push the error to the right, because then I'd have too much. So in that case, it should replace rather than insert. And so I'll show you in the config in a couple of minutes how that's achieved. It's basically dynamically choosing whether to insert or replace based on whether the suffix that's immediately after the cursor matches the thing that you were trying to expand. And then finally, the last thing that we're going to look at in the config is going to be the question of like icons and formatting. So we already saw some of that when I was looking at this console thing before. nvim-cmp is totally configurable. You can change the styling of both the autocomplete list itself and the documentation window. You can change what's shown, the order of it, the sort of it, whether or not icons are shown, all those kind of things. So we'll look at some of that stuff as well. And then I've already kind of mentioned snippets. There's not too much to look at there, but we'll take a look at that in the config as well. So let's dive in. I'm probably not going to do it in the order that's in the table of contents, because that's going to have me jumping all over the buffer. So instead, I think what I'm going to do is read this mostly top to bottom with maybe a couple of side journeys. So as noted in this comment here, which you might have read already, these special icons are actually being provided by Kitty, which is the terminal that I'm using. So if I open this same file on GitHub, you'll see that there is definitely a byte here, but GitHub and specifically the browser doesn't know how to render it because it doesn't have a font to render these code points. So if you were to want to use these icons in your own setup, you'd either need to use a terminal like Kitty that bundles them, or you'd have to install them yourself. But it's kind of a neat feature of Kitty that you don't even have to think about this stuff, it just works. And so you can see all the different icon types that are going to be used there. So let's jump now down. I'm going to jump around a little bit. Let's go to the setup call. If you install this using your plugin manager of choice, it won't actually do anything until you call the setup method and set up some mappings. If you don't set up mappings, it's going to do pretty much nothing. So let's go through this setup just briefly. The first thing that I want to talk about is that ghost text feature that I previously demoed. Now, an interesting thing about ghost text, and probably the reason why it's experimental, even though in my opinion it works pretty well, is there are some edge case weirdness things to bear in mind with it. And so that's what this toggle ghost text function is implemented with a view to helping make things a little bit better. Here's the problem. Just say, let's take a word like toggle text. And imagine that I'm in the middle of it and I want to complete toggle ghost text. Why is that not autocomplete? Because I've got a macro recording? What's going on? Toggle. Okay. For some reason, autocomplete wasn't working, but now it is. So yeah, in a case like this, I actually don't want to see the ghost text because if I accept this completion, it's going to insert HOST underscore before text. It's going to turn that into toggle ghost text. But the implementation of ghost text is pretty primitive. So for example, if I delete that, it only knows to show like the rest of the completion. And so sometimes it would show too much. And the idea here is to not show the rest of the completion, but to just not show ghost text at all when you're inside a keyword, because it actually leads to more confusion than anything else. And that's also especially true with things where you might have like some fuzzy text, because if I go there, like because nvim-cmp is doing fuzzy matching, like I can accept this completion and the whole thing will turn into toggle ghost text. But the ghost text does look a bit weird because it's not showing me how the buffer is actually going to look when it's finished. Because like when I accept this, it changed to toggle underscore ghost text. But what I had was something else. I had something like this, and that the combination of what's in the buffer plus the virtual text of the ghost text doesn't actually show what the end result will be. It mostly works if you're typing and not doing fuzzy searches. But generally, like inside words, it's just maddeningly confusing. So it's just best to not show the ghost text in that case. So that's what this function does. And basically all it does is, first of all, it checks if we're in insert mode. If we're not in insert mode, then it does nothing. It grabs the current column of the cursor, figures out what's on the current line, and then looks at what is immediately after the cursor on the current line. And then it decides whether or not ghost text should be enabled based on what's after the cursor. So if nothing is after the cursor, that means we're at the end of the line and it's totally appropriate to show the ghost text. But if we match this symbol over here, \k, that pattern stands for a keyword character. And so if we look at the help of Vim, there's this is keyword setting, which has this rather interesting default value. Basically, it says, what does a keyword look like? And in most languages, it's alphabetic characters, maybe numbers, sometimes things like underscores, but it is language specific. So if I look at the value of it in this buffer, this is a help type. So it's got those figures, those characters and ranges configured as keyword characters. If I go back to my Lua file, you see it has a different keyword setting, so it's language specific. But the nice thing about using \k to decide whether or not you're before a keyword or inside a keyword is that's going to work in all languages. As long as your is keyword setting is correctly set, this will make a good decision about whether or not to show ghost text. And so these lines down here, they basically just look up the current value, and if the current value doesn't match what we've computed should be the final value, then we actually just change the value. And this thing is going to get called as a result of these two auto commands firing. So entering insert mode and moving the cursor in insert mode. So that includes not only moving the cursor with the cursor keys, but also typing. And because Lua is fast and LuaJIT is fast, even though this thing is running, on literally every mutation that you make inside insert mode, this is totally fine, and it works quite well. So that was ghost text. So, and we were looking at setup, weren't we? Let's jump ahead now to a little bit of formatting. I'm not going to go through this in great detail, but there is a link there to the wiki on the nvim-cmp GitHub site, which provides you a few examples of how you can style a menu. But basically you can put whatever you want in here, and as I said, you can use icons, you can apply styling, you can change the order, you can change the sort. That's all pretty useful. And now we come to what I think is probably one of the most interesting, maybe not interesting, but certainly essential parts of the config is, as I said, configuring mappings, because if I recall correctly, this plugin doesn't come with any mappings out of the box. And so unless you configure them, it's not going to actually do anything. So the first mapping I've got set up here, these are all, I think, in alphabetical order. We probably won't look at all of them in detail. The first one, tell backspace to behave as smart backspace, and I'll look at that in a second. Same for smart tab, I'll look at that in a second. We've got a binding Control-B to scroll the documentation window. So before, when I was showing the completion list and the documentation window on the right, some of those documentation windows end up having quite a bit of text in them, and so Control-B and Control-F to move up and down through the documentation window if you wanted to read more of it. The truth is, you're probably not going to spend a lot of time reading it, but it's nice to have a mapping there just in case. And then another pretty essential one, Control-E, effectively aborts expansion. And the reason why I use Control-E as a mapping is because that is, let's see, Control-E, that is one of the standard Vim definitions for dismissing completion. So as it says here, you can use Control-E to stop completion and go back to the originally typed text. And relatedly, Control-Y, which you'll also see further down the file, that is used to accept the current completion. Then we have the counterpart to Control-B was Control-F to scroll the documentation window either up or down, forward or back. And because, muscle memory and different situations, I've got different ways of cycling through mappings, or different ways of cycling through items in the autocomplete list. So tab and shift tab is one that I already showed. Sorry, I'm going to have to cough. But also Control-J and Control-K, up and down, we have to do the same thing. Control-Y is one that I just alluded to accept the current completion. Basically, the logic here is if the nvim-cmp menu is visible, then we're going to get the selected entry and we're going to confirm it. Otherwise, we're going to do fallback. Fallback is a function that is passed into us in any of these mappings, which basically says, if you don't want to do anything special in response to this particular key press, call the fallback, and the fallback will make sure that whatever mapping was otherwise going to do the handling of the key press does its thing. Okay, so in practice, there usually is a comp menu visible when I hit Control-Y, so it's usually the first branch of this elf, but otherwise it would just pass the Control-Y through to the default mapping. Shift-Tab, because of alphabetical, comes before tab in this config. That's basically doing our smart tab functionality, but backwards. So if the comp menu is visible, it's going to select the previous item. If we've got LuaSnip activated and there's a placeholder that we could jump to, it's going to jump back to it. If we're in a leading indent, we're going to dedent. if we're somewhere else in white space, we're going to do the smart backspace behavior that I'm going to look at in a second, which basically means deleting white space and a shift width at a time. Otherwise, we fall back. And tab, the reverse of that is our so-called smart tab functionality, or at least a wrapper around it. If the completion menu is visible, then we are going to potentially confirm it. If there's only one item in the completion menu, then tab should automatically insert it. But if there's more than one item, then it should select the next item. And then a similar situation, if LuaSnip is active and we've got a place we could jump to, we jump to it. If we're in white space, then we do that smart tab functionality, which, depending on whether you're in the leading indent or the trailing indent, it's going to insert, it's either going to indent the line or insert a shift width of space. And then finally, if the comp menu is not yet showing and none of those other things were true, it's going to try to complete something. So, for example, right here, after I'm in insert mode, I'm at the end of the else. If I hit tab, it's going to try to come up with a completion. And so at that point, it suggests, well, you might want to do one of these things. And those are all the mappings. So in order to fully understand what these things are doing, we've got to look at these definitions of smart tab and smart backspace. I'm not going to go super heavy into them, but where's smart tab is here, okay. But basically, about 20 lines of Lua. It's basically going to just try to figure out, is expand tab set or not set? Are we in the leading indent or not? How many characters should we insert? Handles a bit of edge cases for us, and then smart BS would be pretty much the same. Where is it? It's up here. Once again, depending on whether or not we're in an expand tab situation, whether or not we're in the leading indent, what's the character before us? Are we either going to delete or dedent or do something else? And I'm not going to. You can read this. I'm going to link to it in the description if you want. But in a subtle way, this handles a couple of those little edge cases that were annoying the crap out of me. And you might look at this and say, why would I bother writing 30 lines of Lua just to subtly tweak the behavior of the backspace key? Well, it's because if you press it hundreds of times a day, even the most minimal friction is going to annoy the crap out of you. So, that's why this function exists. And then there's the whole replace versus insert thing that I've got to look at. Now, where would that be? Now, that would be this. As noted there in the comment, there is a feature request to have this behavior implemented in nvim-cmp itself. I'm not sure whether I should try to turn this into a PR or not, because it might be a little bit invasive, but in the meantime, I implemented it locally. So instead of just calling nvim-cmp.confirm, I've got this little wrapper around it, which dynamically decides whether to call replace or insert based on this computation that it's going to do here. Which I already demoed earlier, which is if the suffix matches, then replace the suffix. If the suffix doesn't match, then just insert the completion, and whatever the suffix was just remains in the buffer. And on that issue link there's a lot of discussion about why this is a desirable behavior. I'm not going to go into it now. If you wanted to read more, you could have a look at the issue. But most of this, it's all about basically everything inside that if is deciding whether or not the behavior should be replace or insert. And because the completion items are coming to us from different sources, they may have different attributes. So that's what most of this logic is. It's a little bit fiddly and nasty. But basically, if the completion item has a text edit property on it, it probably came from an LSP server. And we can basically look at that proposed new text and figure out how many characters will be changed after the current cursor position. If the characters match, for whatever length we determine we should be looking at, then we decide to replace, otherwise we insert. This else here is basically looking at another source, a non-LSP source, like maybe a match of a text in the buffer. That probably won't have a text edit new text property, but it could have an insert text property. Those are the ones I found so far. Don't think there are any others. And the fallback here, partly based on me looking at the nvim-cmp source code to decide what it does, is to look at either the word or the label of the completion item. And last resort is just like an empty string. So in my testing, this has worked pretty well. And so we figure out that behavior. Should it be replaced? Should it be insert? And then we call through to nvim-cmp. And so we're getting pretty close to the end now of the things that I want to show you. There was toggle ghost text, maybe something to do with styling, I'm not sure. Snippets. Yeah, I don't really want to show anything of snippets. That's a whole other topic. LuaSnip is super complicated. And so, you can read through this if you want, but, probably the only interesting detail is this little in-snippet function that I had to implement. As noted by the comment there, I looked at the Lua snip source code to figure out how to do this. It's kind of nasty that I have to look at a private method, a private function in order to do this, but it hasn't broken yet, so that's all good. And yeah, I think that's it. So thanks for watching. I don't know how long I've been talking, probably way too long. I hope you enjoyed it and found it useful. Good luck configuring nvim-cmp. This for me is the end of a long journey. At least I hope it's the end of a long journey, because when I look back at all the plugins I've used for auto-completion over the years, it is kind of ridiculous. I think the first one I used was called something like XP something. XP, let's have a look. Was it XP Complete? I used this like 13 years ago. Yeah, XP Complete. After that I used, I think, maybe You Complete Me. After that I used Dearplete. After that I used nvim-cmp by the same author as nvim-cmp, and then finally now I'm using nvim-conf. So it's been a long journey, but this one has been relatively stable, so that's good. Hope that it turns out to be stable for you. If you look at the activity, I remembered one more thing that I wanted to talk about. Good. If you look at the activity on the repo, the maintainer is pretty reluctant to accept feature requests, which I think is good, because it's pretty obvious he's well aware that the more features you add, the less maintainable the thing becomes and the less stable. So in some sense, the plugin is finished, right? And it mostly only gets bug fixes, which is why I'm not sure if the whole MatchSuffix feature is going to get accepted or not. But yeah, pretty stable. And the thing that I wanted to talk about actually was sources. So you can tell nvim-cmp, where to get its possible completions from, and I've got them in this order here. The names are mostly self-explanatory. We got snippets from Lua snip. We got LSP, whatever the LSP server in the buffer might be. Lua specific stuff. Text from a buffer. Calc does stuff like this. So if I go 1 plus 2, 1 plus 2, it offers, doesn't it, like offer to autocomplete that? 100 times 10. Why isn't it working? Interesting. I don't know. I feel like it normally works. Let's go to a new buffer. 1 plus 2. Yeah, okay, so somehow that worked there, but not on the other one. Then we've got emoji, like that. Anything starting with a colon works. And then path-based auto-completion. So if I go, it knows what's on the file system. Now, the reason why I bring this up is because there is also one for command line auto-completion. So, what you get, when you type for something, when you search, or when you try to run a command. I tried using that. It has too many bugs, and so I just can't use it. So if we go down, there we go. If you look at the number of issues here, considering the size of the project, has a lot of issues. And if you read the bugs, it's just not there, I don't think. Sorry. Yeah, so that's why I don't use that one. But everything else I do. And the other thing I should note, and I don't know if I've talked about this on other screencasts, is that you can make your own sources pretty easily. So yeah, that's a good idea. I've thought of one more thing to talk about. So if I go here to comp kit or something like that, or handles. Yeah, there we go. So it's possible to make your own nvim-cmp sources. And in this case, file type git commit. You can see here, you can set up sources specifically for specific file types. So in this case, when I'm in a git commit message, sometimes I want to mention my peers. And so I've got it bound to, when I hit @ it's going to give me a list of all the people on my team, and I can type their names and autocomplete them using this source. But it's not active in other buffers because it's only called for the git commit file type. So this could be a subject of its own, but basically it's really easy to set these things up. All you have to do is make a function. The most important attribute of it is that it should have a compute property that is a function that you can do whatever you want in. It's just going to return potential completions, and they'll be added to the list. So as I said, that's probably a topic for another screencast. But if you've got a very specific use case, you can make your own completion engine. And on the nvim-cmp wiki, there is a huge list, I think, of sources. You could go crazy installing this stuff. Where is the wiki? There it is. So it's something like a list of sources. Yeah, as you can see, many different kinds of completion, and it's all good. So yeah, I think that's all. And once again, thanks for tolerating my rambling, and I'll see you again next time. Cheers.